I'm Katie Keenan, the CEO of the British Chamber of Commerce Dubai, and also host of our podcast, Don't Do That, Do This. So we invite guests, usually our members and our stakeholders, for them to share their insights and what they would recommend doing and what they recommend not doing. On this episode, we have Dan Clark. He is the founding principal of Queen Elizabeth School, opening in Sports City in August. Queen Elizabeth School is also an annual strategic partner of the British Chamber of Commerce Dubai. We've been working very closely together on a number of initiatives, and we'll cover that and many, many more elements of education, AI, and the future of workforce in this episode. So please enjoy and also subscribe if you haven't already to listen to all of our other podcasts and episodes on this series. Thank you.
This podcast wouldn't have been possible with the following teams: Studio Red for their quality podcast studio and video production, and Sherbet Lemon for branding, social media design, and editing.
So thank you, Dan, for joining us on the podcast.
It's a pleasure to be with you. Thank you so much for the invitation.
So the theme of the podcast is don't do that, do this. So we can make this very short, and it's basically don't go anywhere else but go to Queen Elizabeth School.
The correct answer. Thank you very much. Don't go there, come here. Exactly. We're opening in August, and we're really excited about that. And we think we're offering something quite distinct for the market. So we'd love to hear from anyone who is looking for a different kind of school for their son or daughter.
Great. And what's been your personal journey through the education system? Presumably you went to school yourself.
Yeah, I went to what I would describe as a kind of Victorian era day school in Edinburgh. And straight from there, I went up to St Andrews, which again, beautiful settings, very ancient, picturesque settings. And so I've always seen the kind of value of beauty in schools, and the design of schools, I think, is really important, even where they were designed 4 or 5 centuries ago. It makes a difference. And then from there, I got a job after graduating, and then kind of got into teaching, I would suppose, by something of an accident. A friend of mine was organizing volunteer work as a teacher in Poland, about an hour's drive from Warsaw, and I got involved in that after a conversation with him. And that kind of set a fire for me about what I wanted to do. I then decided to take up formal teacher training at the University of Warwick in the Midlands, and then got my first job working in a huge comprehensive school in the city of Derby. Actually, I decided that wasn't quite for me after about 3 years because there wasn't enough opportunity to contribute in the way that was expected in my own schooling, as it happens. And so I then got a job as a head of department at Repton School in Derbyshire, where I stayed for 8 years. Had a great time involved in boarding from the beginning. I'm a really committed boarding educationalist, as it happens. And then decided I wanted to move further south, and got a job at Marlborough College in Wiltshire, again, another substantial boarding school, and had some really good progression there. I ended up being deputy head by the time I left there just back in February. So a lifelong teacher, I think, is what I describe myself as.
And is there an age of children that you prefer to teach?
Well, actually, it's been interesting coming to Queen Elizabeth because we're opening from nursery all the way through to year 8 in the first instance. But the bulk of my experience has actually been at year 9 and above, because the boarding schools I've worked in traditionally start at year 9. But I did have some experience with year 7s and 8s in my first school. And I'm actually a governor at a multi-academy trust of primary schools in Wiltshire, as it happens. So I've got some experience. I quite enjoy teaching teenagers. They've got a spark about them, and energy about them. And of course, they're starting to shape up who they are and where they want to be. And I've loved kind of curating that for them. So yeah, I enjoy teaching them. And I'm really looking forward to seeing our first crop of year 8s work their way through our school, through to year 13 over the course of the coming 5 or 6 years.
So you talked about architecture of schools and that being really important. So just for everybody listening or watching, Queen Elizabeth is on the crossroads of the Hester Street Junction in Sports City, opposite where Waitrose.
Waitrose, that's the key landmark, is Waitrose, just opposite. It's actually, the building is actually currently operating as another school brand, a Renaissance school that's moving. It's closing, actually it's closing at the end of this term. So in 3 or 4 weeks on July the 3rd, we've been involved in a really substantial redecoration, refurbishment program, lots of work happening. Anyone who's been driving by down Hester Street will have seen that work going on over the course of the past 6 or 7 months. Phase 1 of that program was delivered about 3 or 4 weeks ago. and phase 2 is due to be delivered in the first week of July. And that gives us 6 or 7 weeks to get the building operational. My team are due to arrive on or about the 13th of August, depending on where they're coming from. So yeah, we're really excited about that. And actually, it's been a really interesting project. We're at the heart of Sports City, and have a really strong partnership with ISD, who own the space around there for the use of some of those facilities. But also, we have our own incredible facilities that have been struck since I got to Dubai about the extent to which all of the schools have incredible facilities, which would be the envy even of schools, even the best schools in the UK. So actually, we'll certainly be in that category in terms of the facilities we have available.
So there are a lot of schools opening, and obviously there's a lot more schools since I got here 14 years ago. There was an option of like 2 or 3.
Yeah.
So what's your USP? Well, how do you stand out as Queen Elizabeth School?
Yeah, I think there are three key things. The school in Barnet, Queen Elizabeth School Barnet, is exceptionally academic. There's a really strong culture of exceptional scholarship for all at the school. I think that's really fundamental to what we're offering. We expect children to be, the phrase they use in Barnet is comfortably stuck in all that they do. It's a very British phrase, that each child should be on the edge of what they're currently capable of and being pushed towards things they don't consider themselves to be capable of yet, but that ought not to be a source of anxiety, that actually the school's culture should mean that children are comfortable in that feeling. So that culture of, they call it free thinking scholarship, but that every child ought to be comfortably stuck in all that they do, whether academic, sporting, or cultural, is really fundamental. Um, Second of all, we want every child in the school to be well known. So we're building the school on what I would describe as a human scale. So the school itself won't grow to be colossal. It'll be a big size by UK standards, but fairly average size by Dubai standards, but also very small class sizes relative to the context. So a maximum class size of 20. And all the prep school classes up to year 6 having a dedicated TA. And from my perspective, parents who are sending their children to the best schools in England are buying attention for their child. Is there a team of experts around my child who understands them, who understands what they're good at, who understands what they could be good at, and who understands what kind of their motivations are? And we're really focused on building that. And the third thing is we're really excited to build a school in which there's a really substantial sense of belonging. I think the best schools in the UK really inculcate this sense that you're part of something bigger than you, whether that's through a 450-year history or kind of more recent successes. Children who believe that they belong to something which is more substantial than just them, I think, have a really strong sense of pride. And we've seen that in the old Elizabethans who live in Dubai, who've been super committed to supporting us, and we want to generate that really strong sense of belonging. And I think that comes through some very traditional things, some strong discipline systems. Everyone understands where they are, they understand what fits and how they fit into the school systems. Also, a house system, which means that young people have a kind of sense of pride that's not just the school, but they're part within the school in a smaller sense. So those are the three things which I think are really focused. I mean, on a kind of philosophical level. On a practical level, there are some really nice things. We've got a nursery, which will be part of a through school, and that's not that common in the city. So I think that's really handy for families who want their child to have the smoothest experience of their education from nursery all the way through to year 13. I think that's one of the distinctive things on a practical level. And also our partnerships that we're establishing, I think, are really important to us establishing ourselves as something quite distinctive in the market. So we've got a really good partnership with Real Madrid for the provision of our football and sporting provision. We're in a partnership with King's College Hospital, which we think is the first of its type in the city, which is not just that they'll be administering first aid to pupils when they fall over in the school, but actually it's a more broad wellbeing partnership for our whole community. And we're excited to bring that level of attention and commitment to our children and the families who are joining the school.
Yeah, I think it's very important as an expat community, to have that grounding. There is a bit of a propensity for families to move their children from one school to the next within Dubai.
Yeah.
I think that's changing, but certainly there was a period of time where people were bouncing from one to the next. And as this kind of third culture, children and community, it's very important to have that stability of knowing where you are.
Yeah.
So it would also help, obviously, with people with siblings as well. So to have one school where you've got the nursery and the school. So I think that is quite unique.
And I think opening up to year 8 as we are has meant we have many multi-children families who want
Mm.
their old, who want, to be honest, they want the commute to be as straightforward as possible. I think is what we can see here. One of the interesting pieces of feedback I've had since I got here, I've met just about every family who signed up with us since February, kind of a really important part of the community we're building, is the sense that families want a prep school vibe or a prep school feeling. And it's just kind of, I'm not sure that every family means the same thing when they say that, or indeed that they really maybe even really can quantify exactly what they mean. But my gut feeling is that they want a sense of community, a sense of belonging, and a sense of a school where they will be known as a family within the school, and that there'll be good lines of communication between home and school. And I guess also a level of academic demand. Some of the families have said, well, our child was in prep school in England, and so we moved to Dubai. We don't feel they've made as much progress at the same pace as they were making in the UK. And so we've been thinking a lot about the level of academic demand that we're placing in the lessons, because it feels like there is a gap there. That schools do find it difficult for whatever reason to replicate the speed and pace and ambition which can be in place in some of those quite small boutique prep schools in the UK, and we think there's a gap for that. So we've been really focused on ensuring that the level of academic demand in the school can come close to matching what you might find in the best prep schools back in the UK.
And obviously, fundamental to that is your teaching staff. So, what's been your recruitment strategy and endeavors in that space?
Yeah, well, look, as I mentioned, I think all these schools in Dubai have incredible facilities, and those are important, especially at the premium end of the market. But actually, in the end, teachers are what's going to make the difference. And so we have used a values-based recruitment framework to find people who understand our project and who share our aspirations and can see what we're trying to do and actually have the skills to deliver it. Point one. And we also thought that it was really important that staff had experience teaching in the UK. So just about all of our staff, give or take one or two, have been trained or have worked in the UK, because an understanding of the British curriculum which we're offering is really fundamental. And I think some experience of working in the UAE too. It's a very particular compliance framework in the UAE. You've got to come to terms with that. I'm learning pretty quickly as it happens. So I think that those are the things that we've been looking for in our staff. And as it happens, our staff are actually all quite similar in a sense. There are people who are very well settled in Dubai. They're not people who are coming out for a contract and then planning to go home again. They're people who will actually be bringing their children to our school. So that has felt quite important to me. Again, working in boarding schools for 20 years, that's the standard. People will have their children in the system, because you can't live a boarding school teaching life without your children being on the same rhythm. And so therefore, the kind of commitment you get from staff who are really in the system, I think, is really high, and that's what we've been aiming at.
And it's kind of it's an open question in the sense of, with the rise of AI, but then you've talked a lot about values and tradition. How do you see those two working together, or do you personally have a preference in focusing on one over the other?
It's a really good question, and I've been thinking a lot about it uh, for about a year, I guess. I read some really interesting articles coming out of the US about the impact of AI, especially on teenagers,
Mm.
and this concept of cognitive debt or cognitive offloading, where young people are not forming the kind of neural networks that you and I have, because we've had to do that thinking when we were young, and the kind of plasticity of the brain among the young is a really precious thing that has got to be properly shepherded. So from my perspective, I guess I'd describe myself as AI adjacent, but AI cautious, because I worry about the use of any untested and unevidenced technology in classrooms, to be honest. So we've been thinking about that quite carefully over the course of the past few months as we've been planning what we do. And we've been leaning heavily into, I'd say, traditional values. And I think one of the reasons for that is that the the ongoing march of AI, um, I think, is going to decrease the importance of knowledge in the job market, because any piece of knowledge will be call-upable, will be acquirable through AI in a moment of seconds, regardless of your intellectual ability. And it strikes me that actually what's going to make a difference in that kind of context is, do you have the kinds of skills that are going to make the difference where everyone can get the knowledge? So can you think critically about what you're seeing or what you're pulling up from AI? Can you evaluate the extent to which it's reliable? I think it's fair to say. Can you negotiate with others? Can you have a conversation where you're debating with someone and you come to a good conclusion? I think is really important. Do you have the soft skills? And one of the things that struck me when I visited Queen Elizabeth School in Barnet is they're really focused on that, because it's so academic and so selective. The knowledge is kind of taken as a given. You're going to be bright, but have you got the oracy skills? Have you got the writing skills? Can you handwrite well? Are those skills in place? So for me, we'll make sure that children have the skills that are needed to navigate AI, but we're not going to become overly dependent on it because, again, I think that children shouldn't be the guinea pigs for this technology, to be honest. I think there needs to be a more sound and solid evidence base for the impact of the use of AI consistently in the curriculum before we get to really embedding it everywhere.
You mentioned the critical thinking, communication, um, authenticity is obviously so key as well. And so much of what children will be seeing online, they're doubting the credibility of it. So as the pendulum hopefully might just swing back to that human interaction, it lends very nicely to what you're saying about the start of life that you're giving them, which is an in-person network that will then, you know, serve them well throughout their life.
Yeah, and I mean, two things on that, if I might. I mean, Queen Elizabeth School in Barnet's got a really interesting um, uh, claim on AI because two of the most important people in the world in AI at the moment are old boys of the school. So Demis Hassibis and Mustafa Suleiman. One of them founded Google DeepMind, and the other one is the senior man at Microsoft for AI. They're both Elizabethans, and so we've got to make sure that we're honoring that heritage. But look, I've seen the real advantages it can bring. One of our scholars, we have a scholarship program at the school, and one of our first scholars, I don't think you'd mind me naming him, Jackson, uh, has set up his own business. He's in year 6, and he set up his own business, 3D printing. And actually, this phone case here, he was the first product for his business. So he set up a business at that age using AI and 3D printing tools. And I think actually that's the kind of AI usage we want to encourage, where it's actually enabling children to go further. It's not replacing those foundational skills, which we think are absolutely fundamental. And we've actually placed reading at the heart of our whole curriculum. And Belle, who's our head of prep school, has been working really hard with our team to establish a kind of spine through the curriculum, which is driven by reading, demanding text, because we think that reading and the ability to analyze and enjoy reading is one of the most fundamental things. And I've taught teenagers my whole career, and I can spot a teenager who read when they were younger from about 20 paces. The quality of the vocab that they're able to use, their ability to add context to what they know and what they're learning, it is massive. So for us, that's going to be at the heart of it. And I think all good schools probably should be prioritizing reading and those traditional skills alongside equipping children to have that ability to use AI in a judicious way.
Yeah, I mean, my teenage girls have there seems to be this real resurgence of literature, so they're always reading at the moment and actually choosing offline actual books rather than Kindles, which is costing me a small fortune, but equally it gives me such joy to see them really lost in a book. And comprehension is such a key part of business.
Yeah, and I think that's some of what's lost with AI because young people are able to get a summary in 5 bullet points of anything, and I think that that ability to analyze something that's longer form and draw out the key meaning of it, I would say, is really fundamental. And it's one of my favorite interview questions for staff, which is, "What are you reading at the moment? What's the last thing you read?" And a teacher who's not able to answer that question in a credible way, is a red flag for me.
Yeah. If I told you I had 2 books that I'm reading and haven't finished either of them, what would that tell you about me?
I think that's a sign of an active mind and a busy person. But I think that being able to lose yourself in a book
Yes.
is a real skill, and it's a diminishing skill. Children
Yeah.
aren't kind of encouraged to do it. But it feels like you're identifying that the pendulum's swinging back towards reading a bit more. I think young people are possibly slightly tired themselves of the amount of screen time that they're having, and those who are feeling that way are pivoting back towards reading. And maybe all of this alarmism isn't really required because it will work itself out. But I don't rely on it working itself out, partly because this technology is so compelling and provides so many effective shortcuts. It's hard for the young minds to avoid it.
So talking about education and technology, through so you're launching in August, but if you were already principal of a school that was open through the regional crisis, it would have to have been a switch to technical platforms.
Yeah, look, that's true. And just by way of background, I took on my last job, which is leading the academic life of Marlborough College in Wiltshire in March 2020.
Right.
And if you do the
Yep.
chronological maths in your head, you realize that was just before COVID. And what's interesting for me is that I visited South Korea in December 2019, and they were some of the first cases of COVID at that time, and I could
So you
see.
brought it to the UK.
Yeah, yeah, that's one of my key claims to fame. But I think I could see there
Yeah.
how this. So I actually got back to Marlborough in January after the holiday, and I said, look, we are going to have to
Mm.
do something here. We didn't have the infrastructure that they needed, and one of the reasons I ended up getting the job that I got was because I was one of the first people to say we need to build the system. So my experience in the early part of that job was building those systems, whether it was for online lessons, for tutorials, for examining. In actual fact, and so actually, from my perspective, I'm very ready for that because that was although it was quite a stressful time, I remember it with some joy because every day we were having to think of something new. We're having to build wholly new systems for the school. And so actually, I'm not excited about that prospect, but I feel really confident in that prospect. And actually, our senior team are all working through that. They've all worked through COVID. They've been working through this in their current setting. So I'm actually confident about that. But I think that what parents want there is an openness from the school, I think, and clear communications about what's happening. And I think for some families, shone a light on schooling, which some have found difficult, I think. And I have got nothing but admiration for teachers who manage this because they're oftentimes managing it alongside their own families who are also involved in online schooling. So no judgment of any sort because I know how tricky it is and I know how tricky it was. But look, we are ready to deliver on that if the situation persists, and of course we hope that it doesn't.
And with your strong collaboration with King's College Hospital London, obviously well-being is so key.
Yeah.
I remember, yeah, the same thing of the last few weeks. I felt really just so sorry for the teachers that were speaking to a screen of 25 black boxes because the children weren't putting their screens on. So how important to you is pastoral care in the education system?
Hugely important. Again, I think because of my own boarding context, where the lessons are 30% of any given week. The rest is about how the child is developing. How happy they are. And I think that I was maths out for around about 12 years a live-in member of staff. So I lived in boarding houses for that time. And so I've been on the kind of the sharp end of the pastoral care life. And I think that the best schools are those which can allow children to grow themselves and give them the room to grow in the directions they want to grow in. But they also have high expectations. I don't think pastoral care can be a reason not to have high expectations. And I'd often describe my last school as having a culture of high expectations but high structure. So the systems are in place to ensure that children can get support when it's needed. We're in the midst actually at the moment of interviewing for a school counsellor and the counselling team, for example. And I think that that's a really important appointment for us. I'm working with our head of inclusion and our deputy head pastoral to try and find that right person to make sure they're bringing that culture of support to our children. And look, I think that we want children to be happy in school because it's where they're spending so much time every week and it's so formative that I had a blissfully happy time at school, and it was the same kind of setup. The expectations were really high, but there were a whole team around me who knew more about me than I think I probably knew about myself at that time. I want to bring that kind of culture to the school.
And in terms of inclusion, do you have experience of working with a mixed ability group in terms of neurodiversity?
Oh yeah, I mean, the interesting thing about moving to Dubai is I think the extent to which in the UK there's I think there are probably more diagnosed SEN needs in the UK than there might be in Dubai. Things like ADHD. There's much more diagnosis of that. I think being driven by parental diagnoses in many cases. Parents are thinking, "Oh my goodness, I've learned something about myself." It turns out I've had ADHD my whole life, and so we're building as inclusive a culture as we can. Uh, Neve, who's our head of inclusion, has got a lot of experience in that space, and we're providing a whole range of support, including things like occupational therapy in the school. So we're trying to do as much as we can on the site. So we'll have those kinds of facilities through our partnership with King's to ensure that where children do have particular needs, we're in a position to support them.
And in terms of sports, so you mentioned ISD and Real Madrid. Is that right? I'm not a sporting person myself. How is that in terms of the curriculum, what percentage of the curriculum is outdoors and sporty?
Well, we're lucky enough to have some very good facilities, which means that while they won't always be outdoors, weather permitting, we've got really strong outdoor spaces, including a colossal indoor astro, which is going to be a really important part of our provision. But working with those partners, we've done it in a layered way. So we don't just want those partners like Real Madrid focusing on the best children, because actually all children need access to the best kind of coaching. So that partnership and the other partnerships we're building involve supporting the curriculum. So they will be supporting us in that. It will involve support in our co-curriculum program that we call Flourish. But it will also involve support for our elite sports pathways. So for children who are Route 1, who are very focused on a particular sport, then our partners will be working with them too. And that's really important. And actually, we had an event, I think about 3 weeks ago now, for our founding families with Real Madrid, a kind of collaboration event in their space. And I was actually uh, amazed. I'm not surprised. That's the wrong word. I was just super impressed by their coaching. I was wandering around the different groups they'd set up by different year groups, and I was really impressed by how attentive they were and how actually transformative the best coaches can be. If you have a really good coach in something, that's the way into something. That's the way that passions are built and the way that an earnest interest in a subject develops or a particular discipline develops. So I'm really excited about that. I understood how strong they were in the abstract when we signed our agreement with them, but actually seeing them, I was like, that's got the potential to really build some interest. And I think, again, the best schools can do that. They can open up new horizons for young people that they didn't even know were a possibility for them. And I'm hoping that through those partnerships, we build that kind of rich culture where young people are finding out things about themselves they didn't really know.
And are there aspirations to do kind of exchange programs between Barnet and Dubai?
Yeah, it's really interesting because, of course, Queen Elizabeth Barnet is a boys-only school, and we're going to be co-ed. And so Neil Enright, who's the head there, and I have been talking about the plans for what they'll do with the first girls in his school when they arrive. So we're looking at an exchange program for year sevens. You can make the most of it. As it happens, when I worked at Repton School in Derbyshire, I was actually involved in finding the exchange program between the school in Derbyshire and their first school here out in Nado Sheba. So I saw firsthand how again rich that experience can be. Although, to be honest, I was always amazed by how many people we could come to live in Derbyshire for a fortnight from the glamour of Dubai. It was less of a challenge to understand why those from Derbyshire wanted to head out here. So we're really keen to do that, and we're also keen to build a very rich trips program. I think
Mm.
one of the real advantages of this context is how close lots of amazing things are. So we're excited to respond to the demands of our founding families and to build our trips ecosystem around the interests that we're developing.
Yeah, it's when you look at the experience, like my school experience compared to my daughter's, and I think about, cross country running in the boggy fields compared to the AstroTurf,
Yeah.
you know, imported in from Switzerland kind of experience. And you wonder, are they missing out not having that kind of rural education? Like, what do you see as the benefit of an education in Dubai?
Yeah, look, I thought since I started visiting Dubai in 2009, 2010, and my encounters with those first children I met as part of that exchange program, was actually how confident and internationally minded children who've been living in Dubai are. They have an ease about them in different cultures, which I find to be really interesting. Even, I was teaching children at that point at Repton who were actually international as it happens in the UK, but they didn't have that same exposure to a very, very diverse community. And I think that brings about a certain degree of confidence and worldly wisdom,
Mm.
which isn't available in those very rural settings. And so I certainly think that's an advantage. Again, I think that, it's impossible to build the kind of outdoor sports infrastructure in a school here because the sun makes it very difficult to do. So I think the best that we can do is make sure that children have access to the coaching in the indoor setting,
Mm.
which is going to mimic that to as large a degree as that's possible.
No, no. I mean, I'm sure it's a better experience having that. My favorite days when my children were young enough, I was on a class WhatsApp group,
Yes.
but it was the international day where all the parents were discussing which dish people would bring in, and then my daughters would come home saying, "Oh, we tried, had all the different international dishes." But also through such things as the regional crisis, there is a very deep appreciation for their classmates that are impacted from their country of origin. So yeah, I definitely see the benefit, a huge benefit of them schooling here. And of course, that's why people go back in the summer as well, to get into that National Trust Park and let them climb a tree.
Yeah, and actually, I think there's an openness to, again, just from my own background, there's an openness to international education. It wouldn't be unusual for a child from Dubai to decide, I'm going to go to university in Singapore, or I'm going to go to university in Australia. That's back home. That's actually much rarer as it happens. I mean, there's a strong culture maybe going to the US perhaps, and maybe some of the kind of Northern European countries. But actually, there's an openness to new experiences and adventurous experiences here, which I think is really commendable and that we're looking forward to supporting. But your point about National Day is really interesting. I'm really excited about our first one of those as it happens. But they have a similar event at the school in Barnet, and it's actually in a couple of weekends, and I'm going to that event. I went last summer. They have a kind of face, and because of the diversity of families in that group, there's a very similar thing. I had some incredible Sri Lankan food when I was there before, some unbelievable Taiwanese food in the schools. So we're really excited to build an equivalent option. And actually, it's one of the interesting things to think about how you translate the culture of a finding school to a different setting. And it's really nice for us that there's a similar opportunity already.
So the big opening, so you say the staff will be in place kind of middle of August,
That's
and then the doors open.
31st as in line with it. And we're really excited about that. There comes a point. I was actually offered this job in January 2025, and so there's been a long run in. You need a long run in, of course, but it's been a long run. So actually, the sense now in which it's tangibly close and going to happen, and we're starting to think about all kinds of exciting things like uniform and meals and those kinds of things, means it's one of the kind of signs that it's no longer an abstract exercise. It's actually going to happen.
Yeah.
And that's the exciting part.
And you've been so active through our own chamber events and meeting members of the community, and kind of it's been great to see how active. And I must also say as well, the communications of the school have been really, stand out through the just staying very consistently what your messages are, the confidence in the market. And I think that's really, really key in times like this. And so, kudos to your
Yeah.
to
Well, look, I'll return the compliment. I mean, I got to Dubai in February, so February 18th, shortly before things took a turn, and it's been a real boon for me to have been a member of the BCCD, because actually I've made lots of connections, some friends, through that channel, and it's been an incredibly um, supportive group, and I've had lots of really positive conversation with people in industries that I didn't even know existed before meeting, but some where it's actually been very helpful, and we've made a number of good connections for the school, actually, in some very diverse areas around things like sustainability, the installation of water fountains. I think our connect for that came through the BCCD. So actually, yeah, I'd recommend it to anyone who's new and who is interested in business. The networking opportunities are really, really very positive, and I've enjoyed that. And we've tried to stay focused on our message through all of this, because in the end, this will pass. And people will remember the support that you gave them during these times, and that's felt really important to us.
Yeah, no, that's really key. Is there anything else that you'd like to end the podcast with? Any key messages that you'd like to leave the listeners?
No, come see us. I guess if you're looking for a school for your child between nursery age 2 and year 8, and are released in the British curriculum, and a kind of school that's focused on academic ambition, that kind of sense of your child being very well known in the context and developing a very strong sense of belonging, then would be delighted to hear from any families who are interested. Come visit us. We're actually open, although the school isn't open yet. We have an admission suite in the middle of Sports City, just next door to ISD and Fit Republic. We're hosting families there every day, and we'd love to have more.
Brilliant. Well, best of luck with the launch.
Yes, thank
I'm excited to see the finished product. I drive past it regularly, so
Yeah,
it's been quite the transformation, I have to say.
yes.
And it's a pleasure having you as our annual strategic partner for the British Chambers as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much.